This is Wealth Wake Up with Dick Donahue and Camille Kopenberg. KGMI and the Cascade Radio Group receive financial compensation to present this program in its entirety.
The opinions voiced on Wealth Wake Up with Dick Donahue and Camille Kopenberg are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what is appropriate for you, consult a qualified professional. Investment advisory services offered through CWM LLC, a registered investment advisor. Carson Partners is a division of CWM LLC, a nationwide partnership of advisors. Guests on Wealth Wake Up with Dick Donahue and Camille Kopenberg are not affiliated with CWM LLC.
Welcome to Wealth Wake Up Live. Dick Donahue live and in studio with you today. And the tug-of-war between value and growth continued this week as investors focused on inflation, economic data, and negotiations over debt ceiling legislation. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 1.22%. Then they led the major indices, followed by the S&P up 0.79%, the NASDAQ up 0.09%, and the Russell Index 2000 was down slightly at down 0.38%, which posted a small loss. The essentially equivalent year-to-year performance of the NASDAQ and the Russell 2000 underscores the investor uncertainty regarding economic growth. So we saw the NASDAQ up 13.12% for the year, and the Russell 2000 is up 13.08%. That means people aren't sure whether we're going to see growth or we're going to see value. The September jobs report, 194,000 new jobs, fell far short of the 479,000 that the private sector added, 317,000 jobs, while state and local jobs fell 123,000, due primarily, or state and local government jobs fell 123,000, due primarily to temporary COVID-19 related closures. August's numbers were revised upwardly from 235,000 to 366,000. The employment rate unexpectedly fell from 5.2% to 4.8% as the labor force shrank. Thursday, the Senate passed the legislation to increase the debt limit through December, early December, to forestall a default on U.S. government debt. The House vote is scheduled for next Tuesday. The 2-month delay provides additional time for Democrats to negotiate the terms of their stalled social infrastructure legislation. Inflation concerns continue as oil prices hit a 7-year high. Other price increases included cotton, a 10-year high, natural gas, and other goods and services. Supply chain concerns, including chip shortages, continued to impact new car production and boosted used car prices. The power shortages in China are creating supply delays, and many manufacturing plants are unable to meet their production demands. Longer term, manufacturing companies will likely reassess just-in-time inventory practice, including potentially relocating much of their production back to North America. The third quarter earnings begin next week with reports from J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and Citibank. Typically, third quarter commentaries confirm year-end expectations with preliminary outlooks for 2022. Investors will focus on management commentaries in assessing the equity market performance heading into the new year. The continuing factors of inflation, pending legislation, Federal Reserve monetary policies, and COVID-19 pose a conundrum for investors in assessing the best equity and fixed income investment options. Well, every week I spend some time talking about this COVID tracker update that I get, and I find some really interesting numbers in here every week. And this week, for example, the CDC reports that 214 children 17 years old or under have died of COVID-19 nationwide so far this year. That's 214 children under the age of 17. Now, that compares with 261 Chicago kids who have been victims of gunfire in Chicago, according to local police statistics. I don't know. Anyway, also, there was a recent study of 3.4 million recipients of the Pfizer vaccine found that the effectiveness against infections declined from 88% during the first month after full vaccination to 47% after 5 months. Vaccine effectiveness against infections of the Delta variant was 93% during the first month after full vaccination, but declined to 53% after 4 months. And let's take a little bit of a look here at mortality by age per 100,000 in the population. This was as of October 6th. This compares two states, that's California and Florida. Age 54, age 0 to 54, pretty much equal in both states. 55 to 64, a little higher in Florida. Then in the 65 to 74 range, Florida was about 500 people per 100,000, and California was right there with them. The same thing at 75, 74. At 85 plus, California actually has more deaths than Florida does. And then I found this one kind of interesting, too. This was a COVID-19 hospitalization risk for unvaccinated population by political party. And if the person was a Democrat, there was a 41% chance that 41% of the hospitalization were coming from Democrats, 22% from Republicans, and 26% from independents. So much higher rate of hospitalization for those that say that they're Democrats versus either Republicans or independents. I thought that was a rather interesting number. There was also a report here that showed the COVID cases by regions normalized by population. And this was done using a new daily confirmed cases per 100,000 people using a 7-day average. Well, interestingly, back in, it doesn't give me an exact date here, but about a month ago, the cases were highest in the south part of the U.S. Today, they are at the lowest in the south. And while the cases were higher pretty much across the board in the west, the northeast, and the north Midwest a month ago, they are substantially lower pretty much across the nation. Also, the number of doses has been given, 398,000, 675,000 plus have been administered altogether. Pfizer has about 231 million of those, and I said 1,000, that would be 398,000 million. 675,000, and about 231 million of those have been from Pfizer. And one other little quick summary here. Initial jobless claims last week dropped to 326,000. That was a 10.4% drop from a week ago. Continuing jobless claims also dropped about 3.5%. The box office receipts were down almost 21%. Rail car traffic up slightly, about 1%. Steel production was down. Hotel occupancy down 2.4%. Restaurants that continue to open up as of October 6th. The occupancy was up about another 2.4% for the week. TSA checkpoint data as of October 6th, 1,768,070 passengers a day. That's up 1.6% for that week. The supply of motor gasoline was up slightly, and the global commercial flights as of October 6th, 94,727, down about 0.4%. Okay, Dick Donahue with you with Wealth Wake Up here on KGMI. Well, I'm going to stick one real quick. I'm going to go ahead and go to the break. We'll be back shortly.
And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me, and I gladly stand up.
Welcome back to Wealth Wake Up Live. Dick Donahue with you this Saturday morning. We are live, we are in studio, and we are asset advisors. We are located out on the Pacific Highway in the Pacific Commerce Center. That's part of the complex where Wilson's Furniture is located. Our address is 5060 Pacific Highway, Suite 101, Ferndale, 98248. Our phone number 360-733-1200. Check out our website at wealthwakeup.com. And I guess I should say, was involved in organizing a candidate forum Thursday night out at the Ferndale Event Center. It was broadcast live here on KGMI from 7 to 9 p.m. If you happen to miss that broadcast, you can pick it up on the podcasts, both under Wealth Wake Up here on KGMI. Go to kgmi.com. It's also under the Saturday Morning Live podcast. and it will also be posted on the Common Threads Northwest.org website, including the YouTube videos. So you'll have a couple of options. If you missed it, want to get some information, I will talk a little bit more about we spent almost an hour talking about things to consider in electing school board members, and I am going to talk about school boards here a little bit later because we have to educate our kids, and so schools are very important and a very important topic in this election. Going to do a little summary here of the markets for the last quarter. Basically, start out with market climbing, and we are finding that rising inflation, the two infrastructure-related spending bills currently bogged down in Congress, the potential for the Federal Reserve to begin tapering its monthly purchases of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, and significant container ship bottlenecks at our U.S. ports are just some of the candidates for inclusion in the so-called wall of worry. These are influences that could possibly prevent the stock market from going higher. It's a good time to be risk on or risk off. There is one barometer that continues to flash risk on. Global mergers and acquisitions. M&A deals totaled $4.3 trillion over the first 9 months of this year, the most ever recorded for that period. Corporate executives are expanding their business aggressively in the current climate. So let's look at the stock market. The S&P index closed at 44,307.54 on September 30th. That was 5.06% below its all-time high back on September 21st. The index posted a total return of minus 4.65% in September. Only one of the major sectors that comprised the index was up on a total return basis. Top performer was energy, up 9.37%. The worst showing were materials, down 7.21%. The S&P 500 posted a total return of 15.91% over the first 9 months of this year. All 11 majors are up on the total return basis. The top performer is energy, up 43.1%, while the worst showing came from utilities, up 4.2%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average reported that S&P index stock buybacks totaled $198.84 billion in the second quarter of this year. That's up 11.63% from the $178.13 billion that was in the first quarter, and up 124.27% from the $88.66 billion in the second quarter of last year. In the second quarter of this year, information technology, financial and communication services accounted for about 31%, 21%, and 14% and of the gains. There was the S&P index companies distributed about $123.38 billion in dividend payments in the quarter. That was down about 0.43% from the $123.91 billion paid out in the first quarter, but up 3.65% from the $119 billion paid out in the second quarter of last year. Looking ahead, the fourth quarter of the calendar year has been the best for stocks over the past 2 decades. The S&P 500 index posted an average increase of 4.1%. A total of 412 stocks in the S&P index were positive territory year to date through September. There have only been 5 occasions since 2001 when the total number has exceeded 400 positive stocks at this point of the year. The market went on to appreciate in the fourth quarter in all 5 of those instances. Looking at the bond market, the yield on the benchmark 10-year Treasury note closed trading on September 30th at 1.49%. That was up 0.18% over from its 1.31% close on August 31st, according to Bloomberg. The 149 stood 55 basis points below the average of 2.04 over the last 10 years. The interest rates are front and center in respect to the bond market. The returns on major categories were all negative in September, meaning that as the bond prices went up, the total returns were negative. The direction of bond yields moving forward could be heavily influenced by inflation. Let's keep this in mind when you've got a classic, what we call 60-40 portfolio with about 40% in the bonds. If interest rates go up, bonds may not be the right place to be. And so let's take a takeaway. There was a survey by Nixon Investment Managers that found that 60% of Americans have accepted the likelihood that they'll have to put off retirement and work longer. 36% of Americans currently believe that they'll never have enough money to retire. 41% of those polled said that their ability to be financially secure in retirement is going to take a miracle, and the financial challenges do not end there. Lending Club Corporation reported that 63% of all consumers residing in metropolitan areas live paycheck to paycheck, compared to 39% for those residing in rural areas, according to its own release. Might want to be out there in the country. The U.S. Census Bureau reported that real median household incomes declined 2.9% over the year to $67,521 last year. The U.S. poverty rate rose 1% year to year to 11.4%. The total stood at 37.2 million people. The poverty threshold for families of four was 26,496. When you add in higher inflation to these headwinds for Americans, you can see how critical it is to invest for your future. And let's take a look at some of the sectors in the S&P 500 this past four quarters. One of the common questions we field, of course, is what are our favorite sectors? Well, sometimes the answer is more evident than at other times. Well, you didn't need much crystal ball to tout information technology in 98 and 99. They were top performing sectors by a wide margin, as the case with energy in 04-05. But for the first time since 2005, a sector in the S&P 500 index has been able to repeat its top performer in calendar year's basis. Information technology posted a total return in 2019 of about 50.29%. Last year it was a little over 43. The top performing sectors in the third quarter this year: financials up 2.74%, utilities up 1.78%, communication services up 1.6%. So despite being the only sectors in positive territory in September, energy dropped out of the top three after taking the list for the top three previous quarters. So energy has really done very well this year. The other 8 sectors generating total returns ranging from 1.43% of healthcare minus 4.22% on industrials. Total return in the S&P was 0.58%. And the number of total stocks, 412 in the S&P that were in positive territory year-to-date through September. There are only 5 occasions since 2001 where the total exceeded 400 positive stocks. To this point in the year, the market went on to appreciate in the fourth quarter of all 5 of those instances, which I just mentioned here a second ago. Okay, I'm going to stick that quick one in here. Biden's death tax has been spooking us for months now. There are very major concerns over if and when it will be implemented. Well, if you have good news and bad news, the good news is that both the House Democrats and Ways and Means Commission have put forth proposals with significantly lower tax rates than Biden's initial budget. The House Democrats, for instance, would keep all capital gains taxed at a max of around 23 or 28.8%, according to the and counting the surtax. The bad news is a recent adoption by the Ways and Means Commission puts the cutoff date for any company sales that would be affected by Biden's much larger capital gains as September 13th of this year. And that means sales had to be pending prior to that date. Overall, the direction of proposals is getting more favorable for the high net worth community, and there's still a long ways to go. We'll be back shortly.
'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
Welcome back to Wealth Wake Up Live. Dick Donahue with you. Okay, going to continue on with some of the market data that we follow, and had another piece this week talking about the S&P 500 dividend payouts. And as of September 30th, there are 385 constituents in the S&P 500 index that had distributed a cash dividend to our shareholders. There are currently 505 stocks in that index. For comparative purposes, since 1980, the highest number of dividend-paying stocks at any year was 469 in 1980, with the lowest number was 351 in 2001 and 2. Information technology and financials and healthcare contributed the most at 17.424, 14.81%, and about 15%. And that was as of September 30th. The S&P 500 index sector weightings, they're about 27% of the S&P is made up by information technology. 13.3 is in healthcare. 12.4 is consumer discretionary. 11% is financials. A little over 11 in communication services. 8% industrials. 5.8 is consumer staples. About 2.7 of the index is energy. 2.6% is real estate. 2.5% are materials, and about 2.5% are utilities. And as of October 6th, data from Bloomberg indicates that the total dividend payouts for the constituents will total an estimated $61.03 per share in 2021, up from $58.95, which was a record high in 2020. The estimates for 22 and 23 are $65.69. That's compared to $61.03 this year and $69.53 in 2023. The S&P index's dividend yield was 1.38% as of October 6th. And the dividend payout ratio of 60% or less is typically a good sign that dividend distribution is sustainable, according to the Motley Fool. The dividend payout ratio reflects the amount of money paid out as a dividend relative to the dollar's worth of earnings. In the third quarter of this year, the payout was 44.33%. So kind of looking at this chart a little closer that we have, we find, looking at the constituents of the S&P 500, consumer discretionary, 63 stocks are consumer discretionary. Energy is 21, is a relatively low percentage, as I mentioned. Financials are 65, healthcare 64, industrial 73, information tech 73, and the rest of them are all down in the 28 to 30 range as far as the index as a whole. And the percentage of those that are paying out dividends, of the 63% in consumer discretionary, about 34% of them pay out. Financials of 65 companies, 63 of them pay. Healthcare, 64, well, 40 of those pay. Industrials, 73, well, 62% of them pay. So if you're looking for stocks or looking for sectors of the market that pay dividends, that gives you an indication which sectors to look at. And if you look at the total contribution of those 34 companies in consumer discretionary, only about 5.5% of the total dividend comes from consumer discretionary companies. However, energy is about 8.27%. Consumer staples are over 11%. Financials are almost 15%. Healthcare is almost 15% of the total. And the largest contributor, with 75 companies altogether, 44 of them paying out dividends, is information technology, with about 17.24% of the total dividend payout. Now, I saw a headline came out Tuesday that I guess I feel compelled to mention here. We have all this stuff going on about you have to be vaccinated, and for information purposes, I have had my vaccination shots. But I find it rather interesting to see some of the divergences that we're seeing as far as different areas in the state and different things in the state, et cetera. And on Tuesday, there was a headline that thousands of Washington home care workers represented by SEIU 775 remain exempt from Governor Inslee's vaccine mandate. So I guess it says here he's played hardball with his COVID-19 vaccination mandate for healthcare and government workers, but provided a little notice exemption for unionized home care workers who serve elderly and disabled clients. And I have to think that probably, in my opinion, is probably not a more vulnerable portion of society than working with elderly and home care clients. As far as the people they're working with, and then you got your firemen, your policemen, your all other levels of government that are being forced to have their vaccination. Of course, the ferries aren't running at capacity because there's a boycott by many of the ferry workers over having to get vaccinated. And while I'm talking about the ferries, I also saw an interesting piece that came out that a week ago, the Washington State Ferries announced that they would not vigorously enforce mask mandates on the ferries, stating that their employees are not trained to be law enforcement. And the mandate, which was issued by Governor Inslee on August 18th, requires, under the threat of fines from labor and industries, that businesses require all customers to wear masks. Small business groups reacted by calling out the fact that they are not staffed to enforce the state mandate and don't want to put their own staff in jeopardy if a customer fails to follow the rules. It was also reported on August 20th that the Washington State Patrol would not be issuing citations to anyone found not complying with the state mask mandate. And now it appears the state is worried about the same issue, and the practicality of the enforcing the mask mandates is now readily apparent, even to state agencies. The Washington Retail Association Senior Vice President for Policy and Government Affairs, Mark Johnson, basically said that his organization received guidelines with the prior mandate in which the employers were expected to inform customers of the mandate but not directly enforce it by removing them from the premises or causing further escalation. Well, the double standard the state is applying to mask enforcement with its own agencies versus small businesses is likely going to upset a few small business owners. So far, they're being fined by small business owners are basically the ones that are being focused on by labor and industries, and the largest fine so far is about $7,500. And the state is not going to be using should not be using the threat of fines and forced closure on small businesses, especially when you've got that kind of divergence among their own employees. Rather interesting. Now, one of the topics we spent an hour on Thursday night at the forum was on school boards. And, I've been talking about this because I think our kids are very, very important to our future. And basically, school boards can help keep more families from leaving public education by rejecting some of the policies and focusing on core learning. The school boards are facing a lot of controversy right now. This fall, the families of 50,000 students have pulled their children out of Washington State public schools, 5% of the state's total enrollment. School board members are hearing a lot of complaints from parents as politics intrudes on the work of educating children. As a result, there's some confusion about what the responsibilities and powers are of local school boards. So let's take a look at that. Many parents have pulled their children out of public schools for a reason, including children have lost between 4 to 7 months of learning from the COVID school lockdowns. Parents are concerned that schools won't help their children catch up. 2, parents are angry about racial politics taking over the schools. 3, parents are concerned the state has lowered the quality of instruction in reading, math, science, history by rejecting critical race theory ideas for every subject. 4, parents are angry the state has imposed radical sex education, encouraging 5-year-olds to question their biological sex. 5, parents are upset about Governor Inslee's mask and vaccine mandates. And 6, parents are worried about threats from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction to withhold district funding unless Governor Inslee's mandates are followed. So given all these problems, basically what should a school board member do? Well, state law provides some answers. School board members have the power to decide most of these controversies at the local level. Washington is a local control state. The school board hires and fires the school superintendent. The school board controls the district's budget. The school board controls the curriculum teachers use in the classroom. These are provided under state law. RCW 28A.320.015 school board powers spells out that the directors of each district may exercise the following: a broad discretionary power to determine and adopt written policies not in conflict with other law that provide for the development and implementation of programs, activities, services, or practices the board will, 1, promote the education and daily physical activity of kindergarten through 12th grade students in public schools, and 2, promote the effective, efficient, and safe management and operation of school districts. And B, such powers are to be expressly authorized by law, and C, powers are necessarily are fairly implied in the powers expressly authorized by law. RCW 28A.320.230 says that local school boards set policy over instructional materials. The school board then approves the materials selected by the relative committees. The subsection 1F provides that recommendation of instructional materials shall be by district's instructional materials committee in accordance with the district policy. Approval or disapproval shall be the local school district's board of directors. The failure of local school boards to exercise their authority under the law is fueling many of the controversies facing public schools. Parents have many reasons to leave the public education system, and ongoing divisions in our policies and inducing more families to seek alternatives. Under state law, the best way for a school board to retain families and serve children is to focus on core learning, to reject politics, and push racial segregation, and to promote equal treatment and civil rights for all. Now, this paper was put out by the Washington Policy Center and written by Lee Finney. Lee was one of our panel members Thursday night, and she did an excellent job at talking about what needs to be done and the role that school boards have. And I guess I talk about this because I think the schools are very important, of course. I also think that with the elections coming up, you're going to be getting your ballots in the mail this week. And before you sit down and vote, you need to spend some time to understand that these school board roles, these school board elections are very important. And look and really see if those people that you're voting for parallel what your own personal beliefs are and what you believe is best for your own children. And that's my 2 bits worth, and we're going to take a quick break.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd work for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife.
Welcome back to Well Wake Up Live. Dick Donahue with you. If you have questions, you can always give us a call, 360-733-1200. Well, just a recent study came out, says that half of the retirees won't have enough income by 2090. Now, I know that sounds like that's a long time away, but that means those young people that are starting out in life better start thinking about what they're going to do to fill that void. Basically said the percentage of retirees who don't have enough income to get by is projected to increase by 73% before the end of the century, barring major reforms to Social Security and changes to work and savings habits. This is a report that came out by the Urban Institute, which calculates that about 45% of retirees will have income less than 75% of their working years by 2090. That's up from 26% in 2020. As a basic rule, and I can say this when we run financial plans and run retirement capital projections for our clients, we used to think that 75% of your working income was basically where you needed to be. I would say that today that most people that we're meeting with are not prepared to take a 25% cut in their standard of living when they retire. Anyway, the research for this report was funded by TIA Institute, and the model changes to income based on policy changes, extended working years, and increase in savings habits. And they basically said there's a dramatic increase in the percentage of people projected to have too little of income in retirement, assuming no changes are made, whereby the Social Security Trust will be depleted by 2035. By that year, Social Security will cover about 80% of benefits, or probably a little bit less. Structural reforms to this system could include strengthening work incentives, boosting private retirement savings, and ensuring that better financial security for low-income seniors and the disabled. There's a proposal by the Bipartisan Policy Center that aims to keep Social Security system solvent, half through benefit cuts and half through tax increases, which would improve the retirement income in the future, but potentially be not enough for many workers. And further working past the traditional retirement age of 65 has the effects of delaying Social Security claiming, also increasing life incomes. So 2 things, in policy changes as far as the amount of Social Security people receive, tax increases on the amount of money going in, and also encouraging people to work longer. Many people who end up experiencing poverty in retirement do so because they work relatively few years, either because of poor health, facing caregiving responsibilities. There are immigrants in many cases with limited years of coverage. The policies encourage more work, and more savings by themselves will likely leave these vulnerable groups with inadequate retirement income. The average gap in annual income in 2065 is projected to be about $13,000 in today's dollars. So if you inflate that $13,000 at normal inflation rates over the next 45 years or so, you're probably looking at somewhere in excess of $50,000 shortfall. And to fill this gap, vulnerable workers are going to need to save more than $272,000 more in order to close that income gap for the 20 or 25 years that they're expected in retirement. The savings gap is higher for high lifetime earners than it is for lower income earners, and that makes sense because, among other things, the higher income people, they get a lower percentage of their income from Social Security, whereas the lower income people get a higher share of their income, what they were making from Social Security. Basically, in one of the most effective scenarios, the Bipartisan Policy Center's proposed reforms for Social Security would be coupled with a 10% increase in retirement saving, which would lead to an average 62-year-old having about $9,000 more by 2065. So basically, just increasing savings by 10% would fill most of that gap. That's, again, in today's dollars. By comparison, the reform paired with additional 2 years of workforce will also lead to about another $4,000 in income. So working longer is associated with a decline in birth rates, which leads to more demand for the workforce later in life. So more than likely, there's going to be an opportunity for people to keep working. And more years of work produce more income, greater private savings as people save more, draw down their assets for fewer years of dependence on government, greater Social Security, Medicare, income tax revenue can help support annual and lifetime benefits for that tax rate, for any tax rate. So I guess the reason I spend time on this, again, we spend a lot of time running retirement capital projections to help people basically see where they need to be. Now, talking about needing more money, we're also seeing that in the proposals that, and this comes from Ed Slott Organization, and I'm a charter member of his Master Elite IRA Advisor Group. Been going to a couple days a year. In fact, I think 2 weeks from now we're on Zoom again for 2 days. So twice a year we spend a couple of days keeping up with IRA rules and regulations and all the changes, and you wouldn't think there's that many, but there are. Anyway, basically we're seeing that you're talking about needing to save more money. Well, Congress is coming out and targeting IRAs, maybe not for the little guy, but there are some things in here. So basically the proposals from Congress would upend planning strategies in retirement accounts, and especially the use of Roth IRAs. And they are currently proposals, but they've been the focus of attention and intense speculation. No one knows for sure what Congress will do, but given the current climate in Washington, changes are likely to gain traction. The proposal takes direct aim at Roth planning strategies by prohibiting both employee after-tax contributions in qualified plans and after-tax funds in additional IRAs from being converted. So basically right now there's a provision, I'll mention this, where you can put away extra money in your retirement plan. I've talked about this last week on the show. That looks like it could be going away as of the end of this year. So here's the point. This would be an all-out ban on what we call backdoor Roth conversions or mega backdoor Roth conversions from plans. So if you're in a plan, you can actually put away another close to $30,000 away of after-tax money, then convert that to a Roth regardless of your income. At least that also talks about the fact there's been some question about the legality of backdoor Roths and whether they're legal. Well, they obviously are, because if they weren't legal, Congress wouldn't need to end them. Then there's also income limits on Roth conversions. So Roth conversions of pre-tax funds will be eliminated from both IRAs and employer-sponsored plans for single taxpayers with incomes over $400,000, married over $450,000. However, the proposal is not effective until December 31st of 2031, so there is a 10-year window there. So let's talk about the planning point. This proposal would end Roth conversions for high earners. Congress still wants its conversion tax dollars. So what do? Well, maybe this delayed effective date shows us that Congress still needs Roth conversion revenue so it can fill budget gaps, at least for the next 10 years. But now Congress has tipped its hand in this issue. It may be a good time to start planning ahead and begin a series of annual Roth conversions over the next decade. This planning would be even more effective if done before RMDs begin at age 72, since RMDs cannot be converted. And let's talk about mega IRAs. Mega IRAs. The bill would prohibit additional contributions to Roth or traditional IRAs in a calendar year if you have over $10 million total in IRAs, Roth IRAs, or in retirement plans in total. And the income is, if your income is in excess of $400,000 single, $450,000 married. So planning. This likely would make much more of a difference to anyone with 10 million of retirement accounts because the IRA contribution limits are so small in relation to the assets of a mega IRA. For example, the contribution limits are $6,000 if you're under age 57 if you're over, plus there's no such restriction on SEPs, simple IRAs, or company plan contributions, which make for higher contributions. Then we have the RMDs for mega IRAs. This is an interesting one. If an individual's combined traditional IRA, Roth IRA, and defined contribution retirement balances exceed $10 million. I know that doesn't apply to the average listener, but there are people out there that have this. Anyway, if you're over $10 million and have income again above $400 or $450, a minimum distribution would be required the following year. The RMD would be 50% of the balance above $10 million. The RMD would apply even if the individual is not subject to RMDs. In other words, if they're under 72, no 10% penalty would apply regardless of age. But again, if you have over $10 million in IRA or high income, over $400, $450, you're going to be required to take half of that money out. So you might want to consider qualified Roth distributions instead. So if you got Roths, you might want to take it out of the Roth. Now, more complication here. The special 100% rule, RMDs, applies to accounts over $20 million. So when the account balance exceeds this threshold, the amount over $20 million is required to be distributed from Roth IRAs and Roth plan accounts up to the amount needed to bring it down to $20 million or to the aggregate balance of Roth IRAs and Roth accounts. Once the individual distributes the amount of any excess required under this 100% rule, he can then choose the accounts in which to distribute, but you have to take the money out. Planning point. While these proposed RMD rules are extremely complicated, they would likely affect very few IRA owners, especially requirements for those with balances over $20 million. The one way that those gigantic IRA balances might get around these rules is to keep income under the $400,000, $450,000 limits. Wealthy clients who could be affected by these mega RMDs should start planning now to keep income low, since this provision, if enacted, would be effective next year. There's also going to be restrictions on small business people that have majority control in business about how much money they can put in, whether or not they can buy foreign, what we call foreign sales corporations or DISC international corporations. That money's going to have to come out in a maximum of 2 years. A couple of other points. There's statute of limitation for IRA noncompliance is going to go from 3 years to 6 years. So those are just some of the things that we're seeing that are coming down out there that you need to be aware of. This is Dick Donahue with you with Wealth Wake Up Live here on KGMI. Don't forget our show tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Give us a call if you got questions, 360-733-1200. Thanks, and have a great week.